It's Daisy with Bridges 52.7. Let's take a second to talk about Disney's Haunted Mansion movie. I am aware right out of the bat that this is probably very controversial, especially for believers, as to whether or not they want to see it in the first place. There is like occultic kind of witchcraft and seances and things in there, which some people are fine with, some will not be. But what I want to do is maybe not focus so much about what your convictions should be about any of that, but more how do we have meaningful conversations about it? Because I actually thought that this movie had like incredible things to say about what's going on in the world and how the world and the church are dealing with the supernatural. So let me kind of focus on that and not get caught up in this quagmire of different people's kind of convictions on that. Do your research. Go or not go according to your convictions, okay? And let me also preface this a little bit with, I was in New Orleans many years ago with some friends, and someone wanted to see a ghosts and spirits tour of New Orleans. And I was like, I'd done some history kinds of things there before. That was not something I ever would have volunteered for, and probably would have had a little bit of fear and other things, even though the Bible says don't be afraid and God's bigger than what. But I also probably felt like it was a bit of, so first off, there's this part of me that so wants to be the good person that I never want to get anywhere close to anything that might not be good, right? But then there's this other part of me that might be curious, but really deep down, I kind of felt like the whole thing's just a sham and it's going to be ridiculous and why even bother, right? But people wanted to go, and I was like, it'll stretch my horizons. Let's see what they have to say. And so I went. It was actually completely fascinating. It was a dark side of history of New Orleans, and there is a lot of dark stuff in New Orleans, right? And so a lot of it was very historical, things that have happened in different places and why they felt that they were ghosts, and why people had seen stuff and what people had seen, whatever. But it was, to me, less about the ghosts and more about like the history of just some of the hard, awful things that had happened in different places in New Orleans. And because that was kind of the backstory on why they believed there were ghosts, whatever. My point to all this, though, is that our tour guide was this super fascinating man who was like very theatrical. And I mean, he was just fabulous. But he also made a comment that he was a Methodist. And I was curious as to how did this idea of ghosts fit in with his idea of Christianity and his perspective and theology. And I'm so glad I asked the question, because I just kind of was like, well, ghosts aren't real or what, I really had not thought deeply about this. And so I meet this, religious person who, has some sort of Christian background, and I had no idea to what level or whatever, but, again, going off of what he said. And so when I asked him, his answers were fascinating, and they really challenged me in my theology on some things. And he started going through lots of stories in the Bible where people who had been dead were seen alive again on the earth, he wasn't just talking about resurrection, but many times where people were seen post-death on the earth, even Jesus walking around, right, resurrected form. But I kind of like discarded that one. But then he mentioned several other things. One of which is like when Jesus resurrected, or right after he had died for a short period of time, the Bible talks about how people were seen who had been dead walking around on the earth before he ascended. And he was like, what do you want to call that? And I was like, I can't really argue with that. So he had some really great things to challenge me with. And so I kind of went into this movie also, and this movie talks about ghosts and spirit tours and different things in New Orleans. So again, there's a part of me that's had my horizon challenged. I don't necessarily have answers or know where I stand on things, but the conversation is intriguing, and it has deepened my faith and changed how the lens by which I'm reading some things in the scripture, because after that started seeing some more supernatural kinds of things in the scriptures that maybe I had glossed over or not thought deeply about before. So that being said, I think this movie is a kind of a fun romp in some ways. Then it felt a little bit like Disney's Jungle Cruise, and it felt like you're on a ride. I mean, I really felt like they did. I don't even remember the actual Haunted Mansion ride, but I felt like I was on a Disney ride a lot of times with the way that they filmed it and stuff. So I thought they did some really fun, like filming kinds of things. But the part that mostly challenged me was that in this movie, this family goes, this woman and her son go to this house and it's haunted. And so the first thing that they do is they start turning to other people for help. And what you find out throughout the movie is the first person they turn to was a priest who sadly turns out to be a bit of a con artist. And then they go to science, and science doesn't have the answers. And then they go to a medium who also doesn't have all the answers, right? And who is also a bit of a con artist. But all of them are willing to explore this. I mean, they all come up, they all have a supernatural encounter that is undeniably authentic to them and real, but they don't have answers from the different disciplines that they have sought. But together they end up finding, working out a solution, right? I actually think that's very intriguing about what's going on in the world today. I think today we have people who have been having authentic supernatural experiences with the Lord, with whatever it may be. And so they have these encounters, but they go to the church, and so often, and I'm not saying the church has all been a fraud, and that was sad to me, but all of them, it was like nobody was quite trustworthy except for maybe the science person, but even he was jaded and still didn't have the answers, right? But the other two people had maybe some, let me say this, the medium had some genuine encounters, but still was not very confident in her gifting or whatever. And then the priest was a complete con artist at that point, and had no faith at all. But interestingly, and I'm all over the place, I'm sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth. Let me say that interestingly, all of them grow in the direction they were in. So the priest actually gets ordained. The science guy actually goes back to his calling and gets confirmed in some of his advancements. The medium realizes like she does have some supernatural encounters and grows and becomes more confident in her gift as well. And whether or not you agree with any of this, what I find intriguing is that each of them were kind of prophetically acting in a way that maybe they were frauds, maybe they weren't real, maybe there was some different things going on, but every one of them actually became more truly and more deeply what they were pretending to be in the original case. And I think there's actually something to be said about that when you call people out, and so even though like the priest didn't see that in himself, everybody else saw that gifting in him. And he had some kind of organizational gifts and some leadership or whatever. Well, then he starts becoming the very thing that they called out in him in the beginning. So you see this growth that happens in every one of them, which I found kind of interesting because I think we sometimes don't realize the power that we have to help call out the giftings in others. And sometimes what we do is we look at somebody and go, you're a fraud, you didn't have that gift anyways, and we discredit them versus saying, okay, I understand that maybe you were not quite sure who you were, or you were using this falsely, but what if that's actually who you were meant to be and you just hadn't fully stepped into it yet? And so instead of discrediting everybody who maybe didn't get it right, maybe we can help them grow and get it right and walk in that place authentically. In the end, maybe we can actually support people in their journey rather than pulling the rug out from underneath them and calling them out. It's I would say it's like Adam and Eve suddenly like going, oh, you're naked, like we ripped away your fig leaves and we're laughing at you, rather than going, actually, I see that you're trying to hide behind fig leaves. Let me give you a real covering. And God gave them like animal skins. He gave them actual clothes made out of a sacrifice to cover their sin rather than humiliating them for their nakedness. But I think as a church, we've got that wrong. And I think and I don't mean to call out the church, but just as people, we are so quick to call out other people's nakedness that they're trying to hide, rather than going, I see that, but I actually see the good in you. So here, let me help cover you and let me help you walk more fully in that place. So something to learn from that. But the other thing that I think the whole storyline, that the world is having supernatural encounters and they don't know where to go with it. And so often the first place they do go is the church. And if the church doesn't have answers, they will keep looking, and they will go to science, and they will go to the spiritual places, whether or not they are Christian. And again, as a church, we're out there criticizing the New Age and whatever. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying we should embrace the New Age beliefs. However, what I am saying is some of them are more willing to recognize the supernatural and support it. And instead of helping them, and we're, again, the fig leaves, we're so quick to go, you got this all wrong, rather than saying, let me show you what you're missing. You're right, the supernatural is real. Let me help you communicate with the real God you're looking for, rather than just going, how dare you, right? So it's kind of Paul in the on Mars Hill, when he was saying, I see that you're religious and you're worshiping a God you don't know. Let me show you who he is. The world will come looking for answers. And if the church does not know how to handle things, or if we act like frauds, or if we, if we can't engage people and dignify their search and dignify the questions and the experiences they have had, they will keep going to someone who can. So I also really love that at the end of the movie, all of them end up working together towards a real experience. And it's not an us versus them, a science versus religion, what if, or Christianity versus spiritualism or whatever. What if all of those things really is, I actually think this movie is fairly prophetic about the way the world is going, that the Lord is bringing a sense of unity, that science and Christianity are not at odds, and that spiritualism and Christianity are not as much at odds as we have thought. They may have the wrong answers, but the right pursuit. And so as we come together, instead of seeing them as enemies, as we can kind of say, hey, let me show you the more authentic spiritual pursuit, the bigger power. You're looking for a spiritual power, let me show you the true power. As we can help come together and support their pursuit and direct it to the authentic, true, real answers, I think we're going to find that the Lord is bringing unity to the world in a way that we've never experienced before. And this movie actually really points to that. And I know that a lot of people can have a huge problem with the movie, and I'm not saying that it didn't have its flaws in terms of, I know that the Bible says to stay away from the occult and things like that. But what I see are people who, it's probably less about the occult and more about, I think sometimes what we think the occult and people worshiping the enemy, what if it's not always that they are trying to serve Satan? What if they are just looking for answers and they have not found them when they have gone to the church, so they keep looking, and so they have gone to the occult because the occult will actually dignify the question and the search and the pursuit. And if we will recognize and honor their pursuit, instead of making what they are, the way they are pursuing it, the enemy, if we can instead just say, I get your questions, let's go search together. And this movie gives us such an opportunity to do that. If we will say, let's talk about the things like me asking that guy, what are your experiences with the supernatural? And what do you think about ghosts? And how does that fit in with your theology? Instead of going, how dare you, this is all evil. Instead we had a really meaningful conversation, and we both were able to grow and challenge each other in that. And the same thing, I've worked in the jail, and I've asked the girls at times, have you guys had supernatural encounters that maybe you don't feel like you can talk about in the church? Tool 1, every person has said absolutely. And if I come in going, oh, that's all just evil, or it's because you did a Ouija board or whatever, instead I can go, okay, I may not encourage the Ouija board as a pursuit or a seance or whatever, but hey, you're searching for God. Let me show you the way to do that. Let me show you a better way to look. And then all of a sudden we're having really productive conversations. And now we're not just making everybody an enemy or they're not evil because they searched in a way that I don't approve of. Instead, we're talking about ways that they can take their hunger for the supernatural, which is such a good thing. We need to dignify that. People are hungry for Jesus. They are hungry for real supernatural encounters. Let's help them know how to go about that. But again, the movie is right that if we don't, as a church, know how to point people to Jesus, and we don't know how to dignify their questions and understand and again, dignify the fact that they may have had some real encounters that they believe are supernatural. If we can't honor that, they will never come to us with the deeper questions that they have. They will go somewhere else that will say, sure, you had a supernatural encounter. Of course you did. And then we'll help them continue to search, and we'll point them in the wrong direction for that search. So let's enter into the conversation. So you don't have to go see this movie. That should equip you plenty fine to have good conversations. But what if it just opened up doors to say, have you ever seen what you believe is a ghost or something supernatural that you didn't have answers for? What if that was just that one question just opened up all kinds of, what if we just allowed ourselves to ask the question and see where the conversations take us without being afraid that we don't have answers. In the movie, she wasn't angry at everyone for not having answers. They just kept pursuing. Okay, the priest didn't have all the answers, but he was willing to admit it, and so he went to someone else who he thought might. So, like, let's ask the science guys and see what they may have to support. Okay, they didn't have it, so they went to some other supernatural kinds of people. They all ended up working together to find true answers. And I think we have a lot to learn from that. That's all I'm saying. Okay, I'm going to land the plane. All right, have a good one.